the edge.
I am familiar with that approach to presenting. So
yeah. So I think we should be good now, right?
Yep, you're good to start.
Awesome. Okay, so my name is Leckie. So I actually personally am billable and support one of the intel agencies. And I own a company called Base 2 Solutions. We are a boutique IT company based in DC. We have people at NSA, DIA, DHS, NGA, a contracted FBI. And we have people kind of throughout, not just this area, but also Colorado, Hawaii, and Norfolk. So to get started, this is just sort of a silly slide where, you know, a lot of people call it different things. There's been pushback at my agency. This is a reuse. Some of these slides are a reuse. So you'll see some of them say DevSecOps, because initially it was DevOpsSec, but then there was a lot of pushback. Well, like, you know, security doesn't come last, so let's put the sec in the middle, and industry sort of refers to it that way. So it's just sort of playing it like it doesn't matter what you call it. And I know at DHS, since we have some people working on DevSecOps there, I think they call it SecDevOps. So all different. So anyways, so just to kind of give you an example of at, you know, the agency, what we did. So there was in existence already a group of, within the engineering team, there was more of a dev pipeline. So it had Jenkins, Artifactory. It had actually SonarQube, which is a little more of a security tool, but also looks at like development best practices. And so and obviously GitHub. So they had built out a pipeline there. People were using Jenkins scripts to deploy more frequently, and then cybersecurity got involved. And so my company Base 2 supported the engineering side, and then also we built out kind of from the beginning this security piece that has a DAST, a SAS, and a vulnerabilities visualization board that we use ThreadFix. And we're actually evaluating some other ones because it doesn't integrate, you know, with some of the newer tools that we're looking at super easily, like X-Ray, and then also Prisma, which is looking at like container scanning. So one of the things we were looking to do was maximize automation of security testing through an iterative and integrated approach. We are not fully automated whatsoever, but we've created a good amount of processes to try to streamline things more. We also have set thresholds on the vulnerabilities that are allowed to come through from both Fortify, which is the SAS that we use, and then we were using Arachne, but we're going to move over to Acunetics for our DAST. So that's the dynamic scanner. And then, so we set thresholds on that. And basically when the build goes through with Jenkins, if you have, you know, exceeded the allowed amount of vulnerabilities, the build will fail, and, you know, there'll be a notification. And sort of the idea is that you can move through the assessment process faster because we define upfront, you know, we're giving you the answers to the test basically. And my understanding coming from the, you know, engineering side before and now being on the cybersecurity side is that a lot of people have the ability to kind of wordsmith their way through accreditation, which, you know, is good for the people that are good at that, but it's hard for others who you know, aren't. So sort of having these set parameters that allow you to push to production and then stay in production as long as you know, follow those thresholds. You know, people have liked it. We've been able to reduce a lot of the NIST 853 controls by implementing these tools and also ensuring that people are using them. So that has allowed us to decrease the time to market, if you will, like that people can deploy to JWICs. They are lighter applications, so web-based apps. We have done a lot of this by, you know, writing a lot of processes and then following them where we're integrating security, you know, ideally at the beginning of development. and this is just this book by Jim Bird, DevOps SME. Some of you might have read it, but that was sort of what it was based on initially. Some of our government leads had read that. So this is just a little bit of history on kind of how it started. So the CIO went to NGA, and I think was it ATO at Hello or ATO? It had some sort of name like that, and was like, I want this. So we started building out, and we had a pilot program initially where they integrated with those dev tools that I mentioned initially, and we had a limited number of licenses from a security tools perspective. So that's the second milestone with security tools with the SaaS vulnerability aggregator. We acquired those, and there's obviously a lot of normalization that needed to be done because these tools, they don't all have the same meaning. A 1 or a 2 might mean something in one tool, and a 1 and a 2 might mean the worst vulnerabilities in another tool. Could be the opposite. So normalizing those and configuring those tools. And then we integrated those tools, like I said, with that CI/CD pipeline. And I use that term loosely because the developers aren't necessarily, deploying multiple times a day in the space that we're in. But so the collaboration to develop the back-end risk management framework process, because at the end of the day, we're mandated to follow that. And so this is sort of like an augmented risk management framework, which we actually call the DevSecOps path to production. And you're using the pipeline and following this process. And it's by doing so, you're getting to ATO faster. So we sort of used the carrot approach to try to get people to work in this way. And then the development of the DevOpsSec framework for the ICIE to basically grade the maturity of implementations. So here is history of RMF to support DevOpsSec or DevSecOps. As I said, we've changed the name. So identification of DevSecOps applicable 853 controls, basically determining, which of those really did we need and which was augmented by the tool set, and which maybe we could just say, this isn't important, because one of the big things that you see on the next one where it says identification of applicable CCPs. I don't know if you guys have CCPs. So just to get you familiar, basically a CCP is you could think of it almost as like an application, a provider that if you leverage their tool or you leverage their baseline or their stack in some cases, like for example, the platform as a service at this agency is a CCP, right? So if you leverage the platform as a service, a lot of the OSI stack is completed for you, right? You're not, really worrying about those bottom layers. And so with that, once security has approved a CCP, so in this case, with the example of the platform as a service, they've approved those, under layers, right? So the containers and things and images, and they've verified everything's stigged and hardened, that anyone that uses that DPaaS, deploys to DPaaS is what we call it, the platform as a service, they are going to inherit those controls, right? There may be some controls where the provider has met part of it, and so that's a shared control. So you might have to write to some of it, write test procedures to some of it, and there might be pieces that are just completely on the system, completely on your app to show how you're meeting those controls. But obviously, the goal is the more CCPs you use, the less, there's really is work for you as a developer to do. And it's also easier for security because we've already assessed those layers and we know they're good to go. And you can also get them, just by leveraging, for example, the program I was mentioning, where there's security side, and then there's also like this engineering side, and together we make the DevSecOps pipeline, right? We have the security tools, they have the dev tools. So they're also, that team is a CCP themselves. So by leveraging their tools, by using Jenkins and, pushing Artifactory and using X-Ray, you are going to also meet some of those controls, and you don't need to meet then as many. So obviously RMF business processes were important throughout. We had to place some entry criteria on the pipeline. Like we couldn't take, we still don't take mission critical applications. We take mission essential. I mean, there's certain things like, we're not interested in a system that is used in an aircraft, for example, or something that really needs to have like high availability at all times, to the point where, it's jeopardizing people's lives. So we created 2 paths to production. One we called the minimal viable product, and the other one is a standard product. Basically, they were I'll get into those soon, but they fall under this DevSecOps path to production. And they're like these 2 different lanes that, depending on your app, you can choose from and you would, apply to. This is just sort of a not exhaustive list. Some of these we don't use. We do use JFrog X-Ray for infrastructure security, which we have started to use and implement in a cross-domain solution that we have. So we're scanning code and binaries and things moving from low to high using JFrog. We have GitHub, Jenkins, we have GitLab on the low side. We use Jira. Obviously we use Exacta. We use Splunk, but it's not really in our in the pipeline. It's more like you see there, the enterprise service. It's just sort of something that everybody has to use. We have SonarQube in our pipeline. We have ThreadFix, but we have ThreadFix. We also had Twistlock and we moved over to Prisma. We have Fortify, and we have are replacing Arachne with Acunetics. And then also a big thing with for the platform as a service is the Docker. We do use OpenShift and Docker Kubernetes. So these are just some of the tools, again, that I just went over. So the security side of the house is called WASP. That's basically just the team's name and kind of the part of the pipeline that makes up those security tools. And then code is the kind of CI piece, CD loosely, where you're using those more development tools. And so, the overall kind of pitch here is that, using, WASP is the agency's application security solution and is also a common control provider, right? By leveraging those security tools, you're gonna meet a number of those NIST 853 controls. And WASP augments the CI/CD pipeline, that team's called Code, with a robust security tool set to help developers quickly identify and remediate vulnerabilities. So this gets into those 2 lanes I was mentioning earlier that are underneath this DevSecOps way of working. And just checking the time. Okay. So an MVP, we came up with, and it's like a limited ATO. So it's basically something that, you have people that just kind of want to prototype something, or maybe they're a data scientist and they kind of want to build something, but they don't know that it's going to go anywhere. But they do want to be able to move to production. Maybe there's data there they want to interact with. So we developed this lane. We have a higher risk tolerance because there's a lower level of data watermark that you can have within this path, if you will. And then if you want to, go longer than 6 months with your ATO, you can transition into a standard product where you meet some more controls, or you can just decom if, the purpose of your prototype has been proved out and you don't need to continue with it. And there's some other rules around both of these, and some of them are below. But for example, like you have to deploy to AWS on the high side, or the platform as a service, which is built on top of AWS, but completes a little bit more of there's less for you to do on the infrastructure underneath with using that. Then you have a little bit more control with the cloud. But Right now, we don't have a solution for, things that are on-prem. So then this other side of the house, we have the standard product, which, sometimes people come to us and, they might want to be one, and then we're like, no, you're really this other one based on maybe the level of data that they're storing, what they want to do. And so it has more controls that they need to meet based on that. And then just like a regular ATO in our space, they last 3 years. I'm assuming you guys have ATOs, but if not, it's just basically, your authorization to move to production, right? The thing that you need in order for everybody to use your app, or for it to go live, basically. So I mentioned that we tailored those security control sets based on the program's risk tolerance and the things that we were able to build into it process-wise, as well as tool chain-wise. Like I mentioned, you're integrated with security from the beginning. So we actually have a TEM right when you, ideally when you're developing, you come to security and you are saying, I want to try to go this way of working, this DevSecOps way of working. And then you're inheriting, like I mentioned, those CCPs. There's some CCPs we require that you use, and obviously the more you use them, if you can, for your app, depending on how, it just depends, right, on the type of app you're building, whether or not you can, how many of these you can really leverage, because you might need to configure your app differently, and you can't use those other things, and it needs to be kind of customized. So but the more you use those, the more you have this like shared security model, like I was referencing earlier, where we already ATO'd that piece, and so you're just leveraging it, and you get all those controls that CCP is already meeting. So the WAF's tool chain is augmented inline security scanning and vulnerability management. Like I mentioned, it's the DAS, SAST, and that visualization piece. And then you're releasing updates to production as often as necessary with your SCA approval. But, the point is in this path that you're releasing regularly to production, really following the DevSecOps way of working. So this is sort of some more examples along with the data threshold that I was mentioning. There's like, we don't accept wireless applications, mobile, cross-domain, or mission critical. We just, there's some security risks that we've taken on through this process, so we have to limit. We don't have the controls built in to be able to allow these applications to come through at this time. But, one of the things we're always doing is trying to figure out how to improve the pipeline. So if we had like a huge demand for mobile apps, for example, we would look at that.
Hey, Dylan, what does cross-domain mean in this context?
Moving from one network to another.
Oh, okay.
Like one environment. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. So this is just, I figured I should leave this in because I think this presentation, some of these slides we use, we briefed the DevSecOps community of practice, DoD community of practice. And I think we briefed them and they had some questions. So then the next time we answered some of their questions, and this might be useful because, you might have some of the same. So, so the tools that make up the pipeline have their own, RMF authorization. So for example, the WASP program and the code program, it's kind of confusing because we use them to describe so many different things, but like the WASP program or team, if you will, has those various security tools I mentioned, and they're integrating together and they're being fed into ThreadFix. All of that was reviewed and went through a regular ATO process, the RMF, at the agency. And then the dev tools that make up, as I was mentioning earlier, Jenkins, GitHub, all of that, the way they've been configured in all of those apps have also been authorized. And we really don't use penetration testing. That would be like a very, something very like sexy that needed to come through, that we needed to do that. I mean, I wish we did. We just don't at this time. Pre-authorized containers exist along with CCPs that are encouraged for use. Amazon machine images, etc. All that, we want you using those, updating them as they're, updated every month. And that also just, helps you, if you can leverage those containers, get through faster, similarly to CCPs. And then, so we're a little bit bigger now. This is 25 apps. I mean, so we don't have the personnel really to support, but at this time we've increased the licensing ability. And I would say we probably have we could do something more like 50 applications. So it's not huge. We want it to be an agency solution, but it's just not yet. The PaaS runs on top of AWS on the high side. And then a full Exacta workflow exists for DevSecOps that we built out. And, we've removed a lot of the controls. You just, they're not even part of, you don't even look at them. And we are not currently using Iron Bank, but we'll determine how customers can leverage within our current services. I know Iron Bank is used in our space by Platform One. So we had success because cybersecurity was fully on board and led the process development needed for RMF to support the DevSecOps activities. So we use physical CDS, not virtual, but we actually have transitioned, and we do have a CDS using X-Ray and Twistlock and some other tools that we do allow some things to go cross-domain. So this is just looking at where we're going. So we are currently only on JWix with the security scanning piece. The dev piece, the Jenkins, GitLab, SonarQube are all on the low side already, and I think some are on Zipper. But we obviously need to continue to expand. I mean, especially with so many people developing now low side in our space and pushing high side. So expansion of types of applications that we're gonna let through the pipeline. Like I mentioned earlier, we don't allow mobile and mission critical. There's interest in looking at that, but there's actually also interest in potentially making more stringent rules around what apps can come through, but kind of doing them more of like an ATO at hello, where we just grant an ATO, and as long as the application stays within what's allowed through the tool chain and automation and the thresholds, potentially looking at speed over variety of apps that could come through. So we regularly look at that we're not stuck on one tool type. So like I said, we had Arachne for our DAS. We're replacing that soon with Akinetics. We do analysis of alternatives for those that include cost, but also just best of breed. And then ATO at hello combination of DevSecOps pipeline and continuous monitoring and compliance checks. So we're hoping to get more of that kind of con-mon approach into the solution so that you really can have ATO at hello. So yeah, this is the last slide. You're welcome to reach out to me anytime. I think probably the best email, I can add it to the slide, is my first name, which is Dylan, DYLAN.Leckie, and then the same ending at Base2 Solutions, but this one works fine as well. And happy to, talk more about this. We also, I mentioned before when we were chatting, we have some, agile positions. We have within the DoD, like leading, agile application teams, but also some DevOps sec engineer roles, and a variety of others, but I just think those would probably be of more interest to you guys. And then we do a lot of software development as well, obviously, which covers a lot of the agile and DevOps space. A lot of people working in that way or trying to in our space, and that's our website if you want to check it out. But yeah, so that's pretty much it. So any questions or comments?
Yeah, so what kind of savings or what kind of benefit do people get from using the things that you get their authorizations with?
Yeah, so this question is hard, is the standard answer. We we've often give, because like in our space, unfortunately, the devs aren't necessarily focused on just one application and like pushing all the time. So a lot of that timeline gets kind of messed up, because like if they come to us right when they start developing, and then they're like not really regularly working on their application, they're doing other things, that affects the timeline to production. But that, with that said, we have had situations where the application team is focused, it's a priority, they're pushing regularly, where we've seen apps like go in days and weeks to ATO to production that would have in the past been months. And I mean, we've had at our agency, it's been years for some systems and applications. So it can be pretty fast. I mean, it's the speed at which, cybersecurity is working, but also the speed that the developers are working and remediating their issues and working in this CI fashion, where they're regularly having the code scanned because they're pushing their stuff. If they're not, it's not being scanned, and then vulnerabilities can pile up.
What
Thank you.
you said you used the carrot approach. What was the biggest carrot, the biggest draw you got to get people to buy in for the
Well,
team?
I would say the carrot approach is just because I was on the engineering team before, and we were sort of like, part of what we had to do was market the tools to get people to use them. From a cybersecurity perspective, if we build a process around these cybersecurity scanning tools that allows you to get to production faster, right? Like we don't just, not everyone is able actually to use the tools, one, because we don't have the resources at this time, but also because because all of those vulnerabilities and everything needs to be, you need a SCA working with those app teams the way it's stood up, and there's just not that many SCAs and cybersecurity engineers. So the carrot is just that they can get to ATO faster, production faster. And so by implementing the tool chain, but then building this process around it, where, this is the way to work, we change the amount of controls you have to meet. And you can use these CCPs, you can only deploy to AWS. They're incentivized to follow this way of working, if you will, because then they can get to ATO faster, get people using their app faster.
Yeah, and have you seen anything different with your approach and what people are calling continuous ATO, and having anything, someone say, well, we have a formal or an idea of what a formal continuous ATO would be? Or is this just because you've done the kind of ATO at hello idea, you pass these, if you pick one of your two lanes, and then you specify these are the controls you have to meet, that's enough to get them to we're ATO'd and everyone's buying into it, and you kind of boxed it in?
Yeah, I mean, I would say the popularity was more there before, because there's another thing in our division that we built out called the critical control list, which is also a reduced number of controls. And yeah, I feel like also the marketing of like ATO at hello is a little bit unreasonable from like our perspective. It's not really, we're not giving, that's why I was saying, okay, we need to improve, because it seems like when you build this stuff out over time, which we built this out, it went live like a couple of years ago, for some reason stuff gets tacked on, and then the process gets slowed down, which is the whole problem initially that you're trying to solve. So I would say that we definitely need to figure out how to improve it, get to a more streamlined approach. And I think that's going to be just a mindset change. I mean, you don't need to have this full-blown assessment at the end. And that was initially how we built it. There's really no need for the DAO signature, and they can sit on their desk. I mean, they're basically taking the recommendation of the SCA and the CSE, and they just sign it, but it's kind of like a human insertion point that delays things. So yeah, we need to improve and get more to that continuous monitoring approach, but we need to build out that like data science type, machine learning sort of really automated approach, so that we can replace like the human piece and feel more comfortable with tool set.
Okay. Yeah, the reason I ask is we're working towards something very similar at DHS. Where I hadn't thought about the two paths and kind of limiting the number of controls, but we're trying to build up a base of, stigged, hardened AMIs for AWS, and then on top of it, a stigged, hardened, scanned, approved version of Tomcat sitting on top of that. And then if you're putting if all you're doing is dropping a war on top of that and using RDS for the database, then your path to ATO should be really fairly short, right? And we're trying to get them to do the scans and everything along the way. And part of what we're finding is there's a couple groups that don't need any convincing. They want to, as soon as we're ready, they're gonna jump on board. And then we got a lot of other groups like, yeah, I'm not sure we're going to do that. I'm not sure we want to switch over.
Yeah.
And we've been taking care of that one system for the last 4 years. I don't see any reason we need to update the software on there, and it's a different mindset. We're just trying to figure out what types of carrots can we throw them to say, here, use this. It really will make your life easier.
Yeah, and especially when they know that because RMF processes can be like so arduous, when they already know it and they're familiar with the paperwork. Yeah, but the reduction of controls, I think is the biggest thing for people. It's like so much less for them to write to, and you do that. A lot of that is done through those CCPs.
Cool. Thank you. Anyone else? Any other questions for Dylan? All right. Well, Dylan, thank you very much. That was excellent. You're welcome to stay around. I'm sure we'll have some more discussion after, but
Thanks.
go ahead.
Thank you, Dylan. That was great.
Okay, thanks so much, guys.
Yeah, Jason, we are making Paul watch this tomorrow.
Yeah.
All right, Mike, you are up.
All right. Hey, everybody. But while I get started, I was just thinking, this is going to be an inside joke for maybe half of you guys. Who was in on the famous Amos challenge? Who did that?
Neil.
Was it,
Neil. It was just Neil.
Yeah, I think Tom was gone by then. So
Yeah.
Gene and I were the only ones there.
Yeah, it's not familiar.
Yeah. Okay.
Neil decided he would eat nothing but famous Amos cookies for a week.
It was a week. Yeah, he gave up after 3 or 4 days.
3 or 4 days.
I just
Oh
remember
my God.
asking him a question on like day 3, and like you could just you asked him a question, you could just tell like the synapses just weren't there. Like, oh, I don't know.
He said
why.
it was unreal how bad he felt after that long.
Which isn't that surprising though. All right, now let me see, how can I share this? Can I share just I'm such a Zoom noob. We have, all right. What do you guys see right now?
Yep, we got the full screen.
Full screen? All right. This might be presenter mode, but that's fine. All right. So just kind of curious, maybe we can just go around the room, like what flavor of Kubernetes are people using? OpenShift, Rancher, EKS? Are they using any of the tools, Helm, Kustomize?
I can start. I know we use EKS in our corporate side, and then in the client side at DHS, they're not using, well, they're currently not promoting any type of Kubernetes. They have OpenShift and they have a team using it, but they're not sure how they're going to roll it out. They just haven't figured past the one pilot. That's it. So I can go around and ask what some other people are using. Let's start. Tom, how about you guys?
We've used OpenShift and then just Kubernetes by itself. I think for the most part, we're moving toward Helm. And
Okay.
so a lot of people use that. A little bit of EKS, a tiny taste of AKS.
Okay. How about you, Lisa? You guys using Kubernetes anywhere?
Nope. I am at a small startup now, so no Kubernetes.
All right.
Oh,
And Chris.
Hey, how you doing? Yeah, so I actually went from the world of DoD research, where we're doing a lot of Docker and things like that, to now Department of Commerce. So we actually don't even do Docker. But when I was at DoD research, we were doing, everything was server based. We were just really using Docker Compose. We never got it past that level to serverless, really.
cool.
Okay, thanks.
All right, yeah. I was curious what he was up to. So this is a slide about me, my non-work life. So the picture was from this weekend. I don't know why I like it so much. We went, as my girlfriend and I, Sean, we went to, like, I wouldn't call it a petting zoo, but it was somebody who worked at a farm. So we got a private tour of a farm. That's John, who's actually on here. We're at a Caps game. I kind of wanted to show off, like, that's my main arcade cabinet to the right there, which took about 14 years from start to finish. And then my new, like, kind of my COVID hobby as I've gotten into Lego. So you can see kind of like my studio, which I'm in right now in the lower right. And then behind me, I'm theoretically doing a YouTube channel. I don't think I've made any progress in the past couple of months, but theoretically it's still ongoing. And there's pictures of me hiking and carrying gear. And all right, so that's me. My name is Mike, and I've been Red Hat for a long time. And I actually kind of wanted to sort of talk about, like, what OpenShift is in context of newer Kubernetes distributions. So, and hopefully this doesn't come off as too salesy. If it does, just stop me. But OpenShift v2 was a PaaS. So, like, it used the same underlying Linux technologies. It used C groups, it used SE Linux, used other kernel stuff. So it had that runtime characteristics of modern containers. But then ultimately it was not immutable. So when Docker came out and then Kubernetes adopted Docker, and clearly the seed chains were going that way, the engineering made the smart choice to, like, re-engineer OpenShift to use Kubernetes as its upstream baseline. But I thought this was interesting. The whole point of OpenShift is really still it marketed as a PaaS. Really, this concept of, like, give me source code, I give you an image. So I kind of wanted to talk about that. So again, like, building on top of OpenShift, this is probably the most salesy slide I have in the whole deck, to be honest with you. These are all the capabilities that you get with the OpenShift platform. And like with any opinionated platform, you have to make concessions to adopt the pipeline. That's a drawback of any opinionated platform. But the benefit is, things are just, once you stay in the box, things are a little bit nicer. So I want to talk about kind of like what that box is and how you can customize that box. So if you want to play with OpenShift, these are 4 ways to do it. You can install it on your local, I would say, a beefy laptop or a desktop. You can do OKD, which is like the upstream distribution. It's not the same binaries, but it is the same source code. It's the same. It's the upstream distribution for OpenShift. So you can install OKD on your own cluster. You can use the cloud offering if you want to play with it there. Or I actually am a big fan of that final link, learnopenShift.com. You can go and, like, a lot of different tutorials about different development technologies, different, like, service mesh, basic stuff. Really cool. You go there, you just need to get a login. It's free. You can, you get your own namespace. You can play around with it. So those are all 4 ways to get started.
What does the 60-minute time limit mean?
Well, if you go to that site, there's, like, a bunch of them. That one is just literally you just get a 60-minute cluster.
Okay.
Like, you just get a namespace for 60 minutes. But yeah. All right. So the development process, this is, Dylan talked about kind of the CI model, and that we won't be talking about the purple stuff today. But really more kind of about, the general actual development, right? Like, you have an idea in your head, You want to see a container running. What are the what are the tools that OpenShift has to make that happen? So this is kind of just a quick list of all of them. We're going to be covering mostly the ones on the left. Maybe another day we can come back and talk more about some of the, Tecton or Argo, and our OpenShift versions of those. But let's start with just coding and debugging. This is, pretty straightforward. So we have this thing called Code Ready Workspaces. So this is based on Eclipse Che upstream. So it is roughly, it's, I always like to call it Eclipse in a browser. I think this has a lot of value if you're in an environment where, like a primarily Windows environment or otherwise, where you're working on desktops that are really tightly controlled. This could be a good way to kind of, circumvent those issues. Like, for example, on my project, we wanted to introduce Python into our build process, but everybody used Windows. So that was an issue we had. Also with workspaces, you can develop factories, which are kind of, turnkey environments. So it's all designed to help people get spun up quickly. There's a tool we have called Odo, which is, I guess, OpenShift do. And this is designed for people that don't know any of, kubectl or OC commands. They don't understand OpenShift resources, and they just want to create some basic stuff. So if you have a Node app or a Spring Boot app or a Wildfly app, you can run these commands you see on the screen, and then you can get your app up and deployed. What's interesting about this is when that final one right there, Odo watch, it actually pulls it just watches the directory. So as soon as you click save, I think there's like a 5-second back off or something, but as soon as you make a change, it'll push the changes up, and it'll initiate a source to image build, which we'll talk about in a second. It's also worth noting that this concept is used by the IDE plugins. So the VS Code, IntelliJ, Eclipse Che, they all are kind of based around this. But I also will say that, like, this concept, Odo, and the dev file and the components, these are really kind of a development level feature. It's not really easy to integrate these into a CI/CD pipeline. So this is really not going to be kind of your one canonical way you build your app. This, however, could be. So JCube is a Maven plugin that originated with the Fabric 8 team. They kind of, they gave it to the Eclipse community. And now they've kind of made it more genericized. So again, if you're using Maven, you should definitely check this out. It's a pretty easy way to deploy and apply your resources for Maven. All right, so source to image. I talked at the beginning about the whole idea of the OpenShift paths. It's kind of a simple idea of, like, I have source code, I want an image. How do I make that happen? So this is the basic architecture of S2I. So the 3 inputs, you can either have a Docker file, you can do an offline build, like a Maven build, or like a build in Jenkins or your CI tool. You can push the binaries up, or you can, again, just push it the source code into a custom CRD called the build config, which defines your builder image. And we can talk a little bit about builder images, but an S2I builder image is a Docker image that conforms to a certain specification. And once it gets its input, it untars it and then runs the assemble script, which creates the new image, which is then pushed as a single layer into the registry. So, and it's sort of interesting in the OpenShift, the term S2I is very overloaded because it's really fundamentally how all of this stuff works together. It's really a lot of the initial build stuff we had since the original version of OpenShift 3 that we still have to now. So this part I thought was interesting, where if you just give it a Git repository and it finds one of those, essentially build manifest type files, it then derives the correct builder to use. And you can write your own custom builders. You talked earlier about that requirement of having a trusted image. You just want to throw a war in there. Like, WID has one, but you could create your own that has whatever, pre-scans or whatever things you need. Another nice feature with S2I is this concept of a trigger. So with the image change, what that means is, let's say you have an image, let's say there's some vulnerability and you need all your images to be rebuilt. If you build your system around this concept of the image change triggers, once that builder image is updated, all of the downstream dependent images will be sort of rebuilt. And you can also hook the builds into webhooks. All right, so that is the builds. So application configuration, whether it's OpenShift or Cube or whatever it is, you're really a Kubernetes administrator is a YAML administrator. These are the different types of resources you might deploy. Those ones in red are the custom OpenShift CRDs. We'll talk about another one in like 2 slides called a template. Those 3 kind of comprise the source to image concept. But yeah, managing these objects, using the tools. So if you didn't have a custom tool, the basic way that this works is you'd have a YAML file for a deployment, and then you would either do an OC or a OC and kubectl are synonymous. I try to use them both interchangeably, but if you do like an OC create on a template, that object is instantiated into that namespace, and you can only do CRUD operations on it. There's no way to recreate an object. The verb for that would be apply. So if you apply an object, then you can come back later. If it changes, then reapply the object. So those are kind of the bare bones CLI tools you could use, just OC create, OC apply. A lot of people that's what they do. They just script it out. So an OpenShift, the easiest way to do it would be the developer catalog. So this uses the builder images we talked about, templates, which I'm about to talk about, and also Helm charts. So you can all kind of throw them in here. So, again, if you get that self-service, if you want to like replace the default ones with ones that are for your environment, that are locked down, that are, whatever requirements you may have, you can do that. So this is an OpenShift template. So an OpenShift template will create all those things you see right there, build config, deploy config, image stream, etc. Under the covers, a template is another CRD. So the way that you get things to show up in the OpenShift catalog is by that label right there. So you're telling the operator that this is a managed resource. That means it'll show up. I heavily edited this just to make it all fit into one page. But under objects, you would have all of those objects, all of those resources you want to create. And OpenShift template has a very simplistic templating language. So you see at the bottom, you have the name, you can describe it. You can do like UI validations. There's also some other interesting things you can do, like auto generate passwords, stuff like that. And then inside your template config, you can use them kind of like a bash style syntax with that $sign curly braces. The benefit of this is, again, if you're serving a large community and you want to provide like standardized supported runtimes, this is a great tool to do that. It's a great way to kind of push that out. The limitations here are it's really designed to be kind of like I mentioned before about OC create versus apply. These objects are created. So if you have a team that deploys a version of an app, you update the template, there's no easy way for them to apply those changes through the GUI. So here's some of the CLI commands you would run. So those first 2 are kind of the OC new app is a heavily overloaded feature. We actually have a whole course like 288, which is shockingly a lot of, if you call it value or utility, it does a lot. OC new app has a lot of magic baked into it. So that first one is, you just give it give it a URL, it kind of figures out, okay, it's got a package JSON. Let's build this as Node. That second one is you explicitly say, okay, this is a template, and I'll give it this URL. That third one is the one that I personally would recommend if you're really doing this for real, and you actually, meaning that you want to like version control this and then make changes going forward. So with OC process, it basically, OC new app combines OC process and OC create into one command. With OC process, you're getting the rendered objects, and then you can do whatever you need to with them. So what I typically do for my current customer is we take that output, and then we do post patching on it. So that concept, we do not use kustomize with my current customer, but I would, if I had to do it again, I would, another way to say it is, if kustomize exists when we started doing our project, I would have used kustomize. We do something similar. We have a custom Python script that does OC apply. It has the similar concepts. Like with kustomize, what's nice about it is you have a concept of a base. So like, again, your output from OC process would be your base. And then you would just track the deltas as individual patches. So each patch can be very isolated to that purpose. And then you would just have a number of patches per environment, and you can kind of stack those. So I think, in my mind, it keeps your configuration very nice and clean. Any MR that comes in, we're like, okay, we have a bug. You would have like a patch to fix that one thing or add that one feature. Whereas, with other tools, I'll mention in a second, it won't be as straightforward. So I read a blog post that was interesting that said like the pro of kustomize is, the biggest pro of kustomize is that there's no templatization at all. The biggest con of kustomize is there's no templatization at all. And it's like, you always sort of want just a little bit, but what happens is if you have a little bit, you keep kind of spiraling, and your configuration becomes, your OpenShift config becomes its own application to manage. Whereas with kustomize, which is baked into which is baked actually into kubectl now, or OC now, is really just a YAML configuration tool. So, which brings us to Helm. So Helm's charter, if you will, is much grander than that. Helm is really trying to be the Kubernetes package manager, like, Helm install app name is really what they're trying to get. What's interesting, from a Red Hat perspective, is we did not support Helm v2 because Helm v2 had a component called Tiller, which had a root requirement. So there were security concerns with Tiller. So OpenShift only recently started adopting Helm v3 and OpenShift 4 in the last couple of years. So what Helm is all about is Helm has these things called charts. Charts can live in repositories. So repositories are really just any HTTP server. So all you need is an index HTML. I think you can actually do it directly from GitHub pages if you want to. And then the charts define, the different applications that you have. The charts themselves are YAML with Go templates embedded. They're very powerful. They have, it's a very well-rounded solution. I think Helm is really interesting. Again, depending on your use case, like if you're publishing a product that's going to be deployed across multiple sites, and you might not have control over everything where it goes, you might want to add some more complexity into your installation. But if you're more of a microservices team, and you work closely with the production ops folks, you may not need, in my opinion, the complexity of Helm to do that. But so basically, that's the way it works. You have a chart, and then you kind of plug in your values, and then that is instantiated as a release, which can then be managed. Again, OpenShift, the dashboard has support for all these. This is an example of the Helm syntax. And again, I haven't used Helm, and Tom, I'm really curious, your experience with Helm. But like from the examples I have seen and just sort of thinking about it, like if you add a lot of magic and you try to, make a lot of generic, if you really try to apply a lot of sort of, the DRY modern best practices to your configuration, you might be making really good code at the expense of your administrators not understanding how the system works. So, I think it's a bit of a trade-off. If you're doing it more declaratively, there may be some more duplication. But if you're writing some really complex Helm charts, then you have a lot of complexity that is now baked into your charts. One other pattern I've seen that I think is interesting is using Helm for like the base, like the upstream base, like the chart to like kind of lay down like the baseline version of the app, and then using kustomize to track the deltas between environments. And that would be something that I would want to look into when I get to my next when I have to build out my next app. And that's it.
Yeah, I'm far from the person who's best or uses Helm the most, but I think your comments seem to be pretty on. Like with a lot of things, it can get real complex. It gets real easy to get complex and confuse people.
Yeah. And for me, another thing I was thinking about is, kustomize is now baked into the binary, and it's like, Helm is another. Helm is another binary, but that's another thing you got to get approved on the software list. And it's another thing that's not going to be in the environment where you're trying to do, the thing you're trying to do. So depending on how locked down the environment is, like one binary can be a big deal. In some environments, it's not a big deal, but all right.
Hey, Mike, you were saying that, OpenShift is an opinionated framework. What types of, I guess not what are you giving up, but what type of pain do people that are used to working straight with Kubernetes, what are their biggest hurdles getting used to OpenShift?
Well, I don't think it's so much a hurdle in that they don't really adopt the OpenShift way. I mean, if you have there are a handful of things, like egress versus routes. There was a bit of, at one point in time, see, it's interesting about OpenShift is OpenShift came out in like 2015, where most of the competitors like, Pivotal, Cloud Foundry, and IBM Bluemix were more of a PaaS model. And then it really wasn't, and like Docker Compose and Kubernetes came out, that they really focused more on sort of the deployment side of the house. And it was interesting that OpenShift is, of all those competitors, was, Pivotal tried. I mean, Pivotal tried to adopt Kubernetes late in the game. They didn't give up Cloud Foundry. Then they finally did, and, it didn't work. So like a lot of the things that like OpenShift has, like the things I talked about in this, like they've been around for a long time. And I think that they all make sense as, as a unit, but if people aren't used to them, they aren't going towards them. There is another framework that's being developed called Project Shipwright, which is actually one of my skipped slides. It basically is adding additional support in OpenShift for things like build packs, and Conoco. Am I saying that right? Kanko. I know I'm saying that right. So it is
like Kaneko. Yeah, I just Googled it.
Yeah, so it's modernizing like the OpenShift's build infrastructure as well, while still maintaining support for source to image. But yeah. Yeah, I mean, again, like OpenShift is, OpenShift is Cube. So if you have a Cube app, you should be able to run on OpenShift. Maybe you're taking your question more broadly. Issues that people run into a lot of time relate to security. So, the other platforms aren't as locked down. Sometimes you need to apply custom security controls. If your images are all root, that can be a problem. So like, again, depending on, but if your applications weren't written to proper security specs, then you might hit some speed bumps on that.
That's more of it forces you to
Yeah.
use the best practice rather than making you do something that you otherwise shouldn't be doing, right?
Yeah, you could definitely ignore everything I talked about today. Could be ignored. If you can do the bring your own image model, and then use deployments and directly reference the registries, and all that works.
But it's just not the OpenShift way.
Yeah, and again, like kind of why I want to talk about the historical part of it is because, like the deployment config versus deployments, like the specs are very similar, and clearly the deployment spec was based on the deployment config. But but we didn't, OpenShift didn't support deployments for a couple releases after it came out. But nowadays, I feel like, and especially now that the innovation, is more community driven, and like I think you see this with the newer generation of stuff, like the OpenShift GitOps project is ArgoCD. The OpenShift pipelines is Tecton. So it's like, because Kubernetes has matured more as an ecosystem, like the choices that the OpenShift team makes are less esoteric. So
Okay, cool. Anyone else
Donkey
with
here.
questions? Oh, there you go.
Yeah, what is your favorite tool?
my favorite tool.
Yeah, that's OpenShift or Kubernetes related. It can do anything. It doesn't have to have any specific thing.
What's my favorite tool? Okay, so in Vim, there is, if you do set cursor call. So what that does is it gives you a vertical line, which can help you keep your YAML indented.
Oh, that's pretty cool. Okay.
That, and you also do SW equals 2, TS equals 2, ETAI.
Nice.
Do that, set your cursor call, get your YAML nicely formatted. There you
You
go.
lost me at Vim.
Oh, then just, I don't know.
Vim
What
is
to
the
do.
way.
What was the name of that again?
It's cursor COL cursor. It's good. I think it's cursor column.
Gotcha.
Set cursor column. Yeah. That's all you need, though. You need that, and you need the OC client, and just
Yeah.
slinging YAML around. That's what it's all about.
Yeah, there's nothing worse than YAML that's not lined up and you're like, why isn't this working?
Yeah. Another plug is the new YAML editor is actually pretty good in OpenShift 4. Hope that didn't come off as too salesy. I don't have a quota.
It was so salesy, Mike.
So salesy.
Yeah.
Yeah, that slide where I told you I'd just get it all for free. Just go to OKD.
Yeah, that
From the
really
open door.
sold. That
Yeah.
really sold me on it being really salesy.
All right, mission accomplished.
All right. Anyone else with questions for Mike?
Yeah, considering it, OpenShift is like a commercial product. Is it have like, I know this, I don't know if this makes sense, but does it have, like, since it's Red Hat supported already, like, has a STIG or approval by the government, so it's something that could be easily pulled in versus, like, maybe something that's open sourced, or are there any advantages or anything like that?
I'm
with
gonna
that?
phone a friend on that and have John answer.
Okay.
All right. So a solutions architect at Red Hat. So I support customers that use it in government settings, and absolutely they do. So one such requirement is that you need, commercial support. And so using an open source project, that's hard to get that kind of commercial support. So that's where Red Hat comes in. They support it. And then also there are a lot of, as you know, a lot of controls that need to be set and other things that are required to get the platform to ATO. And so as a result, Red Hat puts a lot of time and effort into making sure that we can check those checkboxes. And even beyond that, we have something in OpenShift 4 called the compliance operator. Operator is a thing, essentially, it's, you know, kind of scans. It's like a piece, a thing that's running on the platform that reconciles the state of the platform with what you want it to be. And so it actually will scan OpenShift and see what is in compliance based on various security profiles that you feed it. And it's like, so if I want these NIST 800 whatever control settings, you can feed it the profile. It'll scan the cluster and say, hey, these things need to be fixed, and actually will report it to you. And then even better, you can go through and click with a click above a button essentially and be like, go ahead and apply those controls to my cluster so that I can be in compliance and I can get to ATO faster. So there's, you know, customers, they love the heck out of that because it gets them to where they want to get to faster. So there's a lot of things like that that's baked into OpenShift that kind of you don't get out of the box with Kubernetes.
Yeah, that's excellent because whenever I come up with something that needs to be purchased, you know, the purchasing people will be like, well, there should be something for free, and then, well, why can't I use a free thing? But you know, all the compliance stuff in the government really does make that change. So that I'm glad you explained that. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
Thank you, John.
All right, I'm going to go ahead and kill the recording here. Thank you, Mike, for speaking.